A lot of talk around the water cooler this week is that the RCMP were investigating Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the SNC-Lavalin affair, and then suddenly they were not. Now, to chat about this controversy in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, how did this story get out there and then appear to be retracted the very same day?
Yeah, the short answer is RCMP incompetence on full display once again. Our national police force embarrassing themselves. Look, this started on Monday morning, just after 9 a.m. Eastern time. A group called Democracy Watch. They're an activist group that tries to hold governments to account. They spend a lot of time on access to information, pushing for questions, taking governments to court to make them more open. They posted on their website and then tweeted out a letter that they'd received from the RCMP. They had submitted an access to information request to the RCMP asking for documents related to an investigation into the Prime Minister, Bill Morneau, and former clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, related to obstruction of justice in SNC-Lavalin. So they posted this because the response they got back was, after a thorough search of records, we can't release them to you because there is an ongoing investigation. That's what the RCMP letter said. I'm not directly quoting, but you can find that in my columns and you can find that online elsewhere. But they essentially said, we found records, we can't give them to you because of an ongoing investigation. They then cited the section of the Access to Information Act that details that they are allowed to withhold information due to an ongoing investigation, and then said, after the investigation and any court proceedings are concluded, you can resubmit your request. So 3 times they explained that there's an investigation. Democracy Watch publishes that. They say, look, we've been asking for a long time. The RCMP's answered us. They had submitted the request assuming the investigation was over, and that's why they were asking for some of the documents. And the RCMP said, we can't give it to you. It's ongoing. Journalists jump on this. One of my colleagues at National Post, I think, was the first with the story out, Brian Passafume. He said in his story, this is what the letter to Democracy Watch says. The RCMP is not commenting. The RCMP didn't comment until after 6 p.m. Eastern, Hal. That's 9 hours after the story comes out. They finally said, oh, we're not investigating. If you're not investigating, why did it take so long? Basically, it comes down to incompetence by the RCMP. And we've seen this in so many files and often in much more serious incidents than this. But there's an allegation that the Prime Minister is under criminal investigation, and it takes 9 hours. Now, you know that I am not a cheerleader, a fan of the current Prime Minister, but it is completely unfair to him, to the media, to the general public, to leave an allegation that the Prime Minister is under criminal investigation hanging out there for 9 hours when you've been asked to comment over those 9 hours by every media outlet, and you don't.
Wow. Brian, 4 by-elections were held on Monday. 2 were taken by the Conservatives and 2 by the Liberals. None switched hands. Now, in Portage-Lisgar, Manitoba, People's Party leader Maxime Bernier tried to get elected and failed. So let me ask you, is that it for the PPC, or will Bernier maybe keep it going?
I think Bernier is going to keep it going because it's a fundraising tool for him that pays him a nice salary, and he gets to have a profile. But the PPC is not a serious political party, and they showed it with these results. I think in NDG Westmount, they're never going to do well there, but I think it was below 1%. In Winnipeg South, I think it was 1.7%. In Oxford, in southwestern Ontario, I think it was about 3.5% of the popular vote they got. They are a fringe party. And in Portage-Lisgar, where they finished second last time with about 21% of the vote, Bernier didn't even get 18 the last time I checked, and that was with, I think, 99% of the polls reporting. So Bernier lost on compared to a no-name guy, nationally, comparatively speaking, a guy named Solomon Wiebe. He ran last time, gets 21%, and I think about 9,000 votes. Bernier got a few over 5,000 votes. He got about a quarter of the votes that the Conservatives got. The Conservatives increased their popular vote in Portage-Lisgar, and this was supposed to be the riding that Bernier was going to steal from them. He has failed at least 4 times, by my count, I don't think it's 5 yet, but give it another by-election. He has failed in each instance that he's tried to win a seat under the People's Party. I think part of the problem is this is a man, as I wrote in a recent column, who he reinvents himself all the time. He was never the pro-life candidate. This time he goes into Portage Lisgar, he knows that that is a big issue in the riding. So he suddenly becomes super pro-life and claims the Conservatives candidate is not. Suddenly he's pro-gun and he's getting photos taken in gun shops and posting them online. Gun issues have never been Bernier's thing. Otherwise, he'd have his pal by now. He doesn't. He is suddenly pushing all about the WEF again. He spoke at it as a minister. Maxime Bernier's problem is if you don't like his principles, wait 5 minutes. He's going to have more. He'll tell you what you want to hear to get him to vote for you. But I think most voters see through that based on the results in every election he stood at it as PPC leader.
There was also a by-election called for Calgary Heritage this week. I believe it'll be taking place on July 24th, Brian. Now, the riding has been vacant since Bob Benson stepped down last December. Is this a slam dunk for the Tories?
I think so, and they've got a very good candidate there. Full disclosure, he's been a friend for a long time, Shivloy Majumdar, one of the smartest guys I know on the issue of foreign affairs. He was an advisor to the Harper government in many different forms over the years, but primarily on foreign affairs issues. He's worked to help build democracies overseas, worked with people like Chris Alexander, incredibly smart, very hard worker, was working at the Macdonald Laurier Institute prior, but he does come from Calgary. So, this is the riding that Stephen Harper held previously, that Preston Manning held previously. They generally win by about 70% of the vote. The weird thing is, Bob Benson stepped down back in the end of December. Candice Bergen didn't resign until the end of February in Portage Lisgar. Marc Garneau stepped down in March from NDG Westmount in Montreal. They just had their by-elections yesterday. So I don't know what the Prime Minister was playing at, not calling them all together. He easily could have. Maybe he was waiting, hoping to try and find a way to make this a Liberal win, try and recruit the right local star candidate. But it's going to be a tough job for the Liberals to try and steal another one, particularly this one in Calgary.
It has been close to 2 weeks since David Johnston announced he would resign his post as Special Rapporteur looking into foreign interference. Has there been any movement toward a public inquiry, which many Canadians are calling for?
No, we've continued to have hearings at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee and some interesting testimony from the Public Safety Minister there, from the head of the RCMP, the former National Security Advisor. Interesting testimony, but no movement on a public inquiry or deciding what is or isn't going to happen. And so far, the Trudeau Liberals have been saying, well, give us names. And now the Poilievre Conservatives are saying, commit to calling an inquiry and we'll give you names on who should head it. A bit of, I don't know, one-upmanship politics going on there. If I were advising any of the leaders of the opposition, I would tell them, get together, find 3 names that you can all agree on, and take them to the Prime Minister and try and force his hand that way. Because if they show up and they say, look, here's our top 3 picks, 1, 2, 3, there you go. Somebody like Richard Fadden, former head of CSIS, former national security advisor to both Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau in early days of his first term, former deputy minister, someone who actually knows national security and the threats of foreign interference, unlike David Johnston. You put names like that in front of them and other people of that caliber who don't have partisan ties to any of the parties, well, then Trudeau's hand might be forced. Right now, it's, I don't know, a game of blinking like you do with a dog. See who stares at each other longer before you blink.
Brian, one of the people central to the issue of Chinese interference is Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino. He's also embroiled in the Paul Bernardo prison transfer controversy. Now, federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre wants Mendicino to step down. Any chance that Mendicino will actually lose his portfolio?
No, although I think he should. Marco Mendicino is he's one of the former Crown prosecutors that helped put away the Toronto 18. He is a smart guy who's doing a very bad job at public safety right now. He is messing up time and again, and he's causing the Prime Minister all kinds of problems. Here's the issue. Since Brian Mulroney, no Prime Minister has really fired cabinet ministers all that often. while they're in the middle of a controversy. Brian Mulroney expected his ministers to behave a certain way, and if they didn't, if they messed up on their file, if they had an ethics breach, they were gone. He demanded their resignation or he fired them outright. But the problem is people mess up quite a bit. And so he had a lot of resignations, and people started to put that down as, well, it's a corrupt government. It's a scandal-plagued government. He was trying to run it with ethics. That would be his argument. His critics would say it was scandal-plagued and bereft of ethics, but he would argue, well, I held them to account. Since then, nobody's fired their ministers like that. Chrétien didn't. He would let them, occasionally take a resignation, but mostly he'd let them sit it out for a few months and then eventually do a quiet shuffle later on and say it had nothing to do with the controversy. That's what Stephen Harper did during his term. And same with Justin Trudeau. There's a good chance that there might be a cabinet shuffle this summer, and then perhaps Mendicino gets moved out to something else, but I don't think he'll be dropped completely. The only way that you really lose your job when it comes to being in Justin Trudeau's cabinet is if you cross him. You can be as incompetent as can be, as long as you don't cross him, like Jody Wilson-Raybould or Bill Morneau, you're going to keep your job just fine.
Let's talk about Bernardo for just a second here. Let's circle back to that here, Brian. The federal government said they did not know ahead of time that one of Canada's most notorious serial killers was being transferred from a maximum to a medium security prison. But it turns out they did in fact know. So how did they mess this up so badly?
Well, this goes back to the competence of Marco Mendicino and whether he should be in his job. His office, he came out on the first day and said, I didn't know about this. I found out the day after the transfer. His office knew 3 months earlier. Why didn't they tell him? Or did they tell him? And he's claiming otherwise. We don't know the truth on that. So if we take him at his word, he didn't know. Well, if your staff didn't tell you about this, and this is a huge political bomb, then your staff members should be fired. That your job as a political staffer is to make sure the minister is prepared to protect the minister, yes, but also to make sure that they are able to do their job. They obviously didn't. The prime minister knew the day before. He found out May 29th. Mendicino found out May 30th. But both of their offices, including senior bureaucrats, knew well before. There's been a Liberal talking point that, oh, well, these are young political staffers in their 20s and they don't know they don't know Paul Bernardo because they're too young. The senior bureaucrats knew. They're not 20-somethings. Not all political staffers are 20-somethings. And even those that are, look, that's insulting to say that someone who's involved in politics, who's in public safety, would have no clue about this guy. It's insinuating that because they're young, they're dumb. I don't buy that. There's no reason to buy that. Mendicino should have known. He could have done things to stop it, either directly or indirectly. He didn't. Now there's a demand that he transfer him back. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Brian, Bell laid off 1,300 people, including a number of high-profile journalists such as Paul Workman. Now, Bell said a lot of the recent federal legislation contributed to the layoffs. What are your thoughts?
Look, I'm not sure about the legislation contributing to the layoffs. I can tell you that I used to work for Bell. I know the company fairly well, still talk to people at it. They're having the same problem that every mainstream media outlet in the country is having. We've got a legacy way of delivering our product that doesn't always pay the bills. A lot of I remember one Bell executive telling me for their market alone, $2 million worth of advertising had walked out the door in the previous year to go to online outlets like Facebook and Google. So, how do you continue to keep the same staffing levels when you've got that kind of money walking out just from your local market, never mind the national market? So every media outlet in the country is facing the same kind of pressures. We're all trying to figure out new ways to do it. The government isn't always helping. Bizarrely, the federal government has moved most of its advertising out of traditional media and into social media, a large portion of it. And then they turn around and say, but we'll subsidize you. I'd rather have the advertising and not the subsidy, to be quite frank.
Brian Lilley is one of our regular contributors who joins us each and every Tuesday from Toronto. He's also a columnist with the Toronto Sun. Brian, thanks so much once again for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.